Hey music lovers, let's talk about rock and roll. It's a genre that gets your feet tapping and your heart pumping. It's all about energy, rebellion, and good times. Rock and roll has a rich history. It's a story of influences, innovations, and iconic figures. From its early days to the global phenomenon it is today, rock and roll has left its mark on the world. So, strap in as we take a trip down memory lane. Get ready to explore the roots and the evolution of this electrifying genre. It's gonna be a wild ride. Ever wonder where the term rock and roll came from? It actually started in the church. Well, sort of. The phrase itself was used in gospel and blues music to describe, let's say, spiritual excitement. But it was Alan Freed, a DJ with a passion for rhythm and blues, who popularized rock and roll as the name for this new sound. He played music by black artists like Chuck Berry and Little Richard, introducing it to a wider audience. Freed's radio show helped break down racial barriers in music. He brought people together through the power of rock and roll. Rock and roll didn't just appear out of thin air. It's a melting pot of musical styles, a fusion of blues, gospel, country, and jazz. Imagine the raw energy of rhythm and blues combined with the storytelling of country, all amplified and electrified. That's the magic formula. The 1950s was a time of change, and this new music reflected that. It was a departure from the traditional crooners, a sound that was youthful, rebellious, and full of life. Rock and roll was music that made you want to move, to dance, to break free. Now, let's talk about the legends. The pioneers who shaped the sound of rock and roll. Chuck Berry, the poet of the genre, gave us anthems like Johnny B. Good with his signature guitar riffs. Little Richard, the architect of rock and roll, brought his electrifying energy and flamboyant style to classics like Tutti Frutti and Long Tall Sally. And then there was Elvis Presley, the undisputed king of rock and roll. With his hip movements and soulful voice, Elvis drove audiences wild with hits like Hound Dog and Jailhouse Rock. These were the rebels, the revolutionaries, the ones who dared to be different. Section 5. Rock and Roll Revolution. Culture in flux. Rock and roll wasn't just music, it was a cultural earthquake. It shook up the status quo, challenged social norms, and gave a voice to a new generation. Teenagers, for the first time, had a music that spoke to their experiences, their energy, their desire for something more. The impact of rock and roll was felt everywhere, in fashion, in movies, in the way young people interacted with the world. It was a symbol of rebellion, of freedom, of breaking free from the constraints of the past. It was a cultural phenomenon that changed the world forever. Section 6. From vinyl to digital. Rock's evolution. As with all living things, rock and roll evolved. It wasn't content to stay in one place. The 1960s saw the British invasion, with bands like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones taking the world by storm, adding their own flavor to the rock and roll recipe. Then came the psychedelic sounds of Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin, the hard rock of Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple, the punk rock of the Ramones and the Sex Pistols. Each decade brought new subgenres, new innovations, new ways of expressing the rock and roll spirit. From vinyl records to digital downloads, rock and roll adapted, survived, and thrived. Section 7. Global stage rock around the world. One of the most amazing things about rock and roll is its universal appeal. It's a language understood by people all over the world, regardless of language or culture. From the stadiums of America to the pubs of England, from the beaches of Australia to the festivals of Japan, rock and roll has found a home everywhere. It's been embraced and reinterpreted, with each country and culture adding its unique flavor to the mix. Rock and roll is a global phenomenon, a testament to the power of music to unite us. It's a global celebration of rhythm, rebellion, and the power chord. Section 8. Rock's lasting groove, an enduring legacy. So, what is the legacy of rock and roll? It's more than just a musical genre. It's a cultural force that changed the world. It broke down barriers, challenged conventions, and gave a voice to generations. The spirit of rock and roll lives on in the music of today, in the artists who dare to be different, who challenge the status quo, who make us feel alive. Rock and roll is a reminder that music has the power to move us, to inspire us, to change the world. Section 9. Conclusion. Rock on. Rock and roll is more than just music. It's an attitude, a spirit, a way of life. It's about freedom, rebellion, and the power of expression. So, crank up the volume, let your hair down, and embrace the spirit of rock and roll. It's a timeless genre that continues to inspire and excite. Long live rock and roll.